Ms. Spanberger.
Thank you very much to those presenting today. I appreciate your time. I wanted to start with a question for Mr. Singh. General Votel made comments yesterday talking about the fact that U.S. military engagement with Saudi Arabia and the UAE allows us to have leverage and influence over their actions in Yemen. And in your comments today, you made a comment to the effect that we should expect our partners to follow human rights norms, but we can't tie it together with our engagement. I would ask if you could expound upon that ever so briefly about how it is that we can continue our engagement or could continue our engagement, be it with Saudi Arabia, UAE, or any other country, and separate that from the expectation that we have of how it is that they are engaging.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and let me just start by saying thanks for your continued service to the country in your new role. I want to be very clear about what I mean when I write this. I think it is absolutely appropriate for us to tie arms sales, security assistance programs, training, and so forth to the way that our partners are conducting themselves in war. Mm-hmm. To the question that was asked earlier, I think if we don't believe that our partners are committed to following the laws of war and international norms of warfare, we should not be partnering with them. It's very important for our military that we not be asking them to compromise themselves, their morals, their values, by working with partners who are not committed to those values. What I'm trying to point out, though, is when we talk about those larger issues of politics, of human rights, of social reform, and so forth, I don't think it's been effective to try to tie those issues to security assistance, to use security assistance sort of in a crude way as leverage over unrelated issues. I think that our track record, and I've, as a U.S. official and as an observer, been through so many of these cases, I think our track record in doing that is poor. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. And then my other question, and I'll open this up to you, Mr. Sullivan. During your opening statement, you made the distinction between offensive and defensive military support to Saudi Arabia. And I was wondering if you could expand upon that briefly. How can we ensure that weapons, intelligence, military capabilities that we're providing to Saudi Arabia are for defensive purposes, not offensive purposes, and where you might see some of that overlap and challenges in the way that we're looking at this question?
It's an especially pertinent question in light of the recent reports that what we would historically have classified as a defensive system, like the TOW missile system, is being used offensively, having fallen into the wrong hands, the hands of extremist groups and others. So I concede that a clean distinction between offensive and defensive systems is not always easy to come by, but I do think there are some clear cases, and the two cases that I referred to in my testimony were, one, theater missile defense and missile defense systems more broadly. Dr. Carlin mentioned the possibility of THAAD. I think we could pretty well agree that that's a classically defensive system that can't be used readily for offensive purposes. And then secondly, that the United States itself would increase the conduct of maritime patrols where we control the extent to which we're engaged defensively as opposed to offensively. So those are the types of things that I have in mind, rather than the sorts of things which fall on that line, and we may hope they be used for defensive purposes, but could easily be converted to offensive purposes.
Okay, and I have one last question that I would like your input on. As a former intelligence officer myself, I'm sure you're aware that last week it was revealed that the UAE hired a team of former U.S. intelligence officials to help with their cybersecurity and electronic surveillance. What actions should the U.S. government take, if any, in your estimation, to prevent former intelligence officers from using the tradecraft that they learn through their service to the United States on behalf of a foreign government or a private company in this way?
Congresswoman, I read the same reports and was disturbed by them. There isn't currently a legal framework for tradecraft. There is for, obviously, the provision of classified information, but not for tradecraft, particularly this specialized tradecraft that intelligence officers, and you know this better than anyone, are getting in the United States that they can then go apply to other countries. I think that's pretty disturbing, but I also think that because it's an issue that I don't think has been much on the mind of policymakers or legislators of late, it requires some real study. And so what I hope this committee and others will do is take up this question. Should there be additional legal restrictions on the training and craft that intelligence officers are getting for use elsewhere? I would just add that there are some reports that suggest this tradecraft was turned back on American citizens or American companies. I think that clearly is against the law. But even if it's being used just out there in the world, not in relation to U.S. citizens, I think we are going to need further legal parameters around it. But I would defer to a deeper dive into the issue and the trade-offs and leave it at that.
Thank you.